Hey there friends, it's Missy again. Thanks so much for stopping in today. I'm back with a new layout for Hip Kit Club and I'm using the 2020 May kits. And I'm going to start this layout with a few of the pattern papers that I hadn't really used a lot of yet, mainly the striped paper here with the black and white flowers. I don't wind up using the black with the dots, and I do wind up using this paper here. I just was in the mood for some strips. So that's what I'm going to start with. I'm also going to use some of that hot pink tissue paper that the kits were wrapped in, as well as a punch from my stash. That's an old Martha Stewart flower punch. And then I have some really cute everyday pictures of my daughter trying to choke hug me like she frequently does. And then I'm going to use that everyday die cut from Vicky Booten. I still have all of those that came in the kits. I haven't used those yet, so I'm going to finally use one today. So I'm trying to come up with an idea, and I just decided to start with this paper here, and I wanted some strips, and I thought that I would cut them up separately and try to layer them on the background kind of in rainbow order. That was my first idea of where I was going to start, and my background is textured white cardstock. I usually use the thick smooth white, but this is just textured plain old cardstock. I've done nothing to it. And so we're going to go on a little mixed media adventure today, doing something that I rarely do, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. All I'm doing here is fussy cutting out some of these flowers, and I love how they're white on, or black ink on white paper, because it looks like it was a stamp when you put it on the background, and I love that. Now, I don't know what shape you would call this, but it reminds me of the punch that I'm going to use, kind of like a wonky flower. So I'm going to fussy cut a couple of these out and incorporate this mustard yellow color into the background, since I've got a strip of that color. Hadn't used this paper yet from the stamp market, and I just thought that was a really interesting shape. So I'm going to cut up a couple of those out and use those as layers behind the picture. And I think that my layout is going to go something like this. I'm going to have kind of one photo up top and then one photo below, and all those strips are going to just sort of be the base of where everything goes around. I'm using another one of the stamp market papers to punch some of the flowers. I'm doing 2 of each color. I've got orange, yellow, and pink. And then I took a break and came back and decided to add in some aqua. So I punch a couple of aqua flowers, and then I'm going to cut a strip of that paper also and kind of work that in. And so my idea of rainbow kind of, you know, goes to the wayside, but that's okay. I really like the addition of the aqua with these colors. So I'm going to layer the strips like that and just kind of go with that and see how it looks and see where it takes me. So I'm going to very carefully move everything over. I don't want to kind of forget where things are. And here's what we're going to do. We're not going to use gesso today. Yeah, I decided to use a brayer. I'm going to do a lot of the aqua color on the background, and I'm going to show you the difference. If you've watched any of my other videos, then you see what gesso does. So this is something that you could do without gesso, but it's definitely a different effect. So I'm mixing a couple of Lindy's blues and greens from previous kits, mixing them together on some plastic, using my brayer, and then just rolling it right onto the cardstock. Now, since I don't have any gesso, it's going to immediately soak right through the paper, and so whatever shape it is, when it lands on the cardstock, that's the shape it's going to stay. You know how usually I'll add some water and blend and spread and turn the page this way and that way? That's not going to happen, because if I add much more water than I have here, the paper's going to buckle. It's going to start to kind of ball up, and eventually it's going to create a hole. So I'm going very light here. I'm trying not to add any water at this point. I thought that was a little bit too green, so I'm going to come back in with the blue. And the 3 colors of Lindy's that I'm using, these are all from older kits from months ago. I'm using Tiffany Lou Blue, Blue Hawaiian Blue, and Mad Hatter Mint. And if you backtrack over on the Hip Kit website for all the color kits from the past year and a half or so, you will find all of these Lindy's colors. So I'm doing a little bit of the packaging technique, and this looks like a big old hot mess, but I'm going to put everything back on top of it, and a lot of it's going to get covered, so you're just going to see parts of it kind of peeking around everywhere. And this is a different look than using a lot of water and your brush to spread it around, because you can't really do that. It's going to just soak right through. But I still like it. It's fun, it's messy, it still gives you a very mixed media-ish looking background. But yeah, it's pretty much already dry. It doesn't take long to dry because I didn't add any water, and I'm using minimal spray here. So I'm going to do a little bit more, mix this together, and then here is another example, the packaging technique. You see the shape that it is? Once I press my fingers on it, that's the shape it's going to stay. I'm not going to add any more water to blend it, because if I do, like I said, it's going to start to ball up and tear, and it's going to be a disaster. So I'm going to add in some of this hot pink tissue paper inside the strips. I want it to be uneven. I want it to be torn. I don't even care if it stretches all the way to the end of the paper, or the edges from side excuse me, from side to side. I want this to look layered. I want it to look a little uneven. I want some of the strips to look bigger than the other ones. And I like the way that tissue paper looks. You can kind of see a strip of it above the light pink, and then all the uneven torn parts kind of down at the bottom. And I think that looks really neat, because I'm all about having things uneven and torn and crooked. I just think it gives it some character, and if something's crooked on purpose, then you don't have to worry about it being straight all of the time. Just make it crooked on purpose and let it go. So I'm going to try to bring in all of those little flowers that I punched and scatter them around. I decided to add in some more of the flowers using more of the hot pink, and then just a shade lighter. Again, that's from one of those the Stamp Market papers. Yeah, I like this so far. Let's see what we've got. Okay, I'm going to move it all off and start to glue down the strips very carefully. I know that I'm going to machine stitch through all of these strips, so I'm just going to very lightly glue them down. I don't want to take them off, because if I take them off, I'll never remember how I had them. So we're going to just lightly glue everything down, so it'll be easier for me to stitch through it. And this looks pretty straight, but I'm about to get out my T-square ruler and see how straight this is. And it is so crooked. Look how crooked this is. I'm terrible with eyeballing things, but anyway, I got it straight. I got it stitched down. I used some of the light blue color, or the aqua color, and I did some straight stitching, some zigzag stitching, and some of it was crooked, but oh well, that happens. I am not a perfect stitcher, and I'm okay with that. So I wanted to add in some white splatters. I love using white acrylic paint, just watered down slightly, and my brush to splatter down. I think white splatters look so cool when you've got bold colors like this. Obviously, it's not going to show up on the white part, but on all of the strips and the mixed media on the background, it's going to look really cool. And if you want to get those teeny tiny splatters, you want to just hold the brush still and then use your other finger to tap it, like that right there. And then if you want the bigger splatters, hold it up top, or hold it up higher and splatter it harder like I was just doing. But anyway, you can see how that turned out. I think that looks really cool. I think it just adds a little bit of something extra to the background. And I'm going to start to layer things in. I'm going to put some white tissue paper behind the pictures there, just as a starting point for layering behind them. It's going to help separate the pictures a little bit more from the background. I'm going to use one of the Pocket Life cards around the top picture. I'm going to ruffle up the edges there a little bit with my edge distressor. And then I tried a couple other things for the bottom photo. I almost used the Vicky Bouton packaging again, but I'm going to wind up using this little bit of paper that I have left here. Even though I've already punched through it, little scraps like this are perfect for layering, just like this, because you really can't tell what's behind there. And so I just wanted to use something different. Since I've got pink up at the top, I thought I would use orange and yellow down at the bottom. Since I've got that big chunk of the tissue paper down on the bottom half, I felt like I could add more pink to the top half. I do want to pop those up, so I'm going to add some adhesive foam. behind the photos, and that's just some kids craft foam. I use that all the time. I usually get it from Walmart, but I've also seen it at Michael's. And I did trim off some of the white border around the everyday die cut so it wasn't as thick. So I'm going to bring everything back in and kind of see where we are. I want to see how much space I have left because I want to add some of those shiny silver holographic thickers. I haven't used those yet, but those are coming up. I wanted to incorporate those for part of my title as well. So I want a little bit of space in between every day, which I'm going to overlap on top of the top photo, and then some space, and then the bottom photo, because I want those thickers to go right underneath every day. I tried to incorporate that little flying airplane, but I couldn't make it work the way I thought I could. I'm going to add in some of these little matching stickers from Pink Paisley. There's some pink ones, there's some orange ones, and I'm just going to kind of stick them in and around the strips here on matching colors. And they are really cute. They're just generic phrases that go with pretty much anything. I tried a couple of these Stamp Market phrase stickers. I do wind up using some of those later at the very end, but not yet. I use a couple of the Dear Lizzie stickers. That one says snapshot, and then one at the bottom that says let the fun begin. All right, so here's where I get crazy. I decide to add in more colors, and I'm going to use the melon and the cherry ink pads that we get in the color kit. And this made me nervous because I don't have any gesso on this background, and I'm fixing to pretend like I do. I'm going to use my water brush, so every time I squeeze this water brush, water comes out. And what I was trying to do here was get some orangey, yellow, pink, well, the pink's going to come in a minute, just some color around the edges of where the photos are and where all those flowers are going to go. I just wanted more color on the background, so I'm being very careful with how much water I squeeze out. This actually turns out a lot better than I thought it would, and I think it's because I'm not using a ton of color each time. I'm using more water than color, and I'm using my finger to kind of smudge it around, trying not to reactivate the aqua color because I don't want to create mud. I want this to look orangey in parts, yellow in parts, and see how it turns out. And I think it actually turns out really cool, especially on the parts where the white splatters dried, because the white splatters kind of acted as a resist, and they still appeared white on top of what I'm doing right now. And you'll be able to see that later when it dries. Thought it was really cool. But I'm just going around the edges of the aqua. Not a lot, just a little bit. But I just wanted to show you guys that you don't always have to use gesso. I 100% love gesso, and I would rather use it, and I almost added it before I started doing this part right here, but I thought, no, I want to show how, if you don't have gesso, you can still do mixed media. You just have to be careful, and you have to pay attention to how much water you're adding, and it also depends on how much blending you want to do. But like I said, I'm using more water than color here, using my finger to kind of help it smudge apart. And once it's dry, you'll be able to tell the difference in the edges, if that makes sense. I always like to soften up the edges of a lot of my mixed media so it looks kind of hazy and faded, but I don't really get that effect without the gesso here, and you'll be able to see that later. But it still turns out great, I think. So never fear if you don't have gesso, because it can still turn out. So here you can see what I'm talking about. See how the edges are a little more crisp? They don't fade out as much. But look at there on the left right there. Do you see how the white paint, I didn't even do the white paint again. That's the original white paint that just sort of acted as a resist to all that color. And I think this was also really cool because I was using stamp pads as watercolor. So I'm going to bring everything back and see how it looks. And like I always say, it looks like a hot mess when you're doing it, but when you put everything back on top of it, it just sort of makes sense and comes together. And now you can actually see more of the watercolor that I just did versus the aqua that I did in the beginning with the brayer. You can still see hints of it, which I like. And sometimes you have to do a lot of mixed media to get a little bit of it to show. And I know that sounds crazy, but it also depends on, you know, as your layout goes and you build it, things get covered up, and that's okay, you know, and that's just the journey that that particular layout takes. Okay, here are those super shiny, crazy, metallic, iridescent, what are those called? Look how shiny they, I mean, they, in the light, they are super bright. So I'm gonna dim them just a little bit by smudging a little bit of white gesso on them. And obviously this word is gonna be madness. So my title is gonna be Everyday Madness, because living with my youngest child, yeah, it's everyday madness with her. She's she's a handful all the time. So yeah, I just added some gesso and then smudged a little bit of the orange and yellow ink pads, and they turned out so cool. They still look shiny, but now they have some color to them. And I think that turned out really, really neat. And I think they match a little bit better. They're still shiny, but they just are a little less shiny. If that's, you know, sometimes you want things really shiny, sometimes you want to mute it a little bit. And so I really was pleased with how that turned out. Now, I'm not quite sure they're dry, so if I touch them, I might get some ink on my hands, but I think they turned out really neat. So I'm going to add in some thread before I start to glue things down. I'm going to add some aqua thread up to the upper left area and then to the bottom right area. I'm trying to kind of make sure things are even on the top and the bottom. Like I have pretty much the same amount of the flowers, the same amount of the flowers on the bottom. I added a little bit of the aqua thread kind of underneath the everyday word. It's hard to see it here, but it adds a pop of that aqua right there, and then a pop of it down here at the bottom right. I was just going for a color that I didn't really have a lot of in that area. So now we glue it all down. I'm adding just a little bit of dots in between, or not in between, but underneath the flowers, and then just very carefully gluing things down just where they are. I'm going to layer every day on top of the top photo, and then just kind of turn the layout this way and that and start to glue very carefully. And I get asked all the time, I try to remember to say it in all of my videos, what glue I'm using. I'm using the Scotch Tacky Glue. It does not come in this bottle. This is a fine liner bottle. A ton of people use this bottle. It comes separately. You can find them at Hobby Lobby and also on Amazon. All right, these are the pink paisley enamel / blingy rhinestone dots that we get, and I'm going to use some of those for the centers of all of these flowers. I'm going to use the black ones, the pink ones, and the pearl ones, and they were just enough to add to the middle of all of those little flowers. I think that's turning out really, really cute. And then I wanted to incorporate this black and white striped paper, so I'm going to just tear a little bit of it and add it as kind of another strip underneath the bottom there. So you're only going to be able to see a little bit of it over on the right where the big chunk of the tissue paper is, but I still like that addition of black and white. I'm going to use this little recorded on label from the Stamp Market for my date. So I'm going to stamp that on and then glue it down right here underneath everything. And this is where I come back in with some more of the phrase stickers. This time we're using some of the Stamp Market ones. I'm going to put a couple over here to the left, and then another one up top that says "Oh Happy Day," and then another one down below. And I love little phrase stickers like that. They're the perfect little embellishment. You know, sometimes you have just, excuse me, gosh, one open spot here and there that's perfect for just a little something something, and so those are perfect for that. And they're pretty sticky. I didn't have to add any glue to those. All right, so I'm almost done here. I decided that I wanted some more orange in a couple spots, so I'm just gonna ball up some orange thread and tuck it underneath the left side of the picture here. And I've already glued it all down, so I had to really just kind of stick it in there. But yeah, I just wanted a little more texture, a little more pop of that color right there. So I'm going to do it on the bottom left and then on the upper right also. And that's just the dark orange color. And that side was really glued down. All right, we are almost done here. The last thing I'm going to do before my journaling is stick one more of the pink paisley stickers in. Oh wait, no, that's a Dear Lizzie sticker, I think. It matched right there. It kind of blends in with the tissue paper. It says full of love. And then I decided to do my journaling over here on the left. I kind of had the upper right section or the bottom right section or the lower left section I felt like had the most space, and so I just picked a side and decided to use this left hand side here, and I'm using a black fine tip Sharpie. But that's it. I did add some black splatters after I turned my camera off, but that's the final layout. I love how this turned out. I love how the word madness looks in this final picture. I think it looks really cool. It kind of blends in, but yet you're still able to read it. Here are all the close-ups, and you can see here on the background how the watercolor turned out. But yeah, I just wanted to show you guys that you don't always have to use gesso. It still can work out if you're just in control of how much color you're using, how much water you're using. And I did have to put something flat and heavy on top of my layout. You can kind of see it warping there where the strips are. But that's okay, you know, mixed media is going to warp. I'm all right with it. I expect it to warp. And, you know, it's a homemade layout, so it's never going to be 100% perfect. But I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you got some ideas to try. I hope you'll try a layout without gesso if you do mixed media and see how it turns out. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.